Ukrainian forces say they're marching further east into territory abandoned by the Russians. Now, that's raising speculation they could be planning an assault on Moscow's occupying forces in the Donbas region. Ukraine says its troops are working quickly to restore normal life in liberated towns. But despite this, many Ukrainians see their newfound freedom as an opportunity to flee further away from the front lines.
Residents in the newly liberated town of Kupiansk getting out while they still can. With no running water or electricity, they're heading west to safer regions, deeper inside Ukrainian territory. What was an already scary situation has just become terrifying, with heavy fighting still going on the city's outskirts.
Scared, just scared. I just want to live, and I'm scared for my child.
Kupiansk was under Russian occupation for months.
The toughest moment was when they didn't let us use the internet or contact anyone. They said it's because of people like you, our soldiers and our vehicles get targeted.
Verifying reports from the battlefield is almost impossible, but Ukraine's military says it's crossed the Oskol River, which runs through Kupiansk, and is now continuing its advance east. Ukraine's president says his forces are solidifying their control of the newly recaptured regions.
In Kyiv, we are stabilizing the situation, firmly holding our positions. So strong that the occupiers are really panicking. We warned the Russian soldiers in Ukraine they had only two options: to flee or surrender.
Meanwhile, there are reports of Ukrainian shelling further east in separatist-held regions. Authorities in the separatist-controlled city of Donetsk say 13 people died after a Ukrainian missile strike there. They accuse Kyiv of deliberately targeting civilians. This came as Kyiv accused Moscow of deliberately dropping missiles near a nuclear power plant in Ukraine's southern Mykolaiv region. Missiles fell just some 300 meters away from the power station, the country's second largest. The 3 reactors were not damaged, but the incident has stoked fears that the war could lead to a nuclear disaster. Following the success of Ukraine's counter-offensive in the east, Russia's Vladimir Putin has promised to step up attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, endangering the lives of civilians across the country.
And our correspondent Nick Connolly joins us now from Kyiv. Nick, bring us up to date on the fighting in Ukraine's east.
Just before I get to that, you might be hearing Ukraine's national anthem in the background there. That's something that is part of everyday life here every morning at 9 local time. As for the fighting, well, even here in Kharkiv, you are not totally removed from this. There are lots of air raid warnings, lots of missile strikes pretty much every day. So, if you're really following those warnings, you're in the cellar, in your place of safety a couple of times every night. Further away from here towards where most of that fighting is still going on, we are seeing the Ukrainians making slow but steady progress, nothing on the scale and the speed of what happened in previous weeks, but they are pushing back Russian forces in the northern part of Donbas, which is not that far away from here, because they basically cut off the Russians from their supply lines. They've cut off their logistics hubs, and it seems like they are now moving in the direction of Severodonetsk. That was a city that Russia took at the cost of thousands of lives and a huge amount of material in the middle of the summer. And in kind of further south towards Donetsk, we've seen the Russians trying to advance, trying to push up against positions where the Ukrainians have been since 2014. Lots of outside observers saying it's pretty much pointless given that these are some of the best defended bits of the front lines. So we're seeing active fighting, but nothing of the kind of intensity and speed that we saw prior to this.
OK, so the Ukrainian military has regained ground really quite quickly in this latest offensive. It is slowing down now. But how difficult will it be to hold on to this regained territory?
Well, some of it is hard up against the Russian border. So in theory, if the Russians did have the resources, did have the kind of personnel to reinforce their force, their groups here, they could attack just directly from their own territory. So in a sense, that's easier. Having said that, Ukraine has shown all along that it is very good at defending. That's basically what they've been doing since the beginning of this conflict with Russia in 2014. And they obviously have the superior motivation. There's big problems among the Russian forces, among people who basically don't know why they're fighting, don't feel any particular connection to this campaign. Lots of people who've been forced to fight, who've been recruited in places like Luhansk and Donetsk, others who've been lured in with high salaries. They're not often actually getting paid out in full. So a sense that isn't the bigger problem. The bigger problem is actually now going to be just preparing for the winter and getting Ukraine's army ready for fighting in totally different conditions.
We know that missiles have fallen near Ukraine's second largest nuclear facility, close to Mykolaiv. How worried are authorities there about what's happened?
Well, definitely this is very scary. A couple of hundred metres only dividing that missile strike from the main power station. This is after we've seen weeks of tensions and of fighting around the other big power station in the south of Ukraine near Zaporizhia. I think this is about two things. On the one hand, this is about upping the stakes and scaring people in Europe who've been supporting Ukraine, that Russia is really willing to go all out and to risk these kind of catastrophic events to really put pressure on European backers of Ukraine to kind of force Ukraine back to the negotiating table at Moscow's conditions. But this is also about civilian infrastructure. People here in Ukraine could be facing a very cold, very uncomfortable winter, and if they lose these power plants, if they have to be shut down, it's all going to be a lot more difficult. So far, Ukraine has done a pretty amazing job at recovering and of kind of rebuilding stuff after damage. But if two huge power stations, along with all kinds of other infrastructure, are out of work, out of normal routine functioning, then this is going to be a situation where lots of people maybe who want to come back to liberated parts of Ukraine won't be able to because there's no normal civilian life possible.
Thanks so much, Nick. That's Nick Connolly reporting from Kyiv.